The massive space station Concordia floated in the darkness between stars like a giant metal flower. Its 6 arms stretched out into the void, each one bigger than most cities back on Earth. Inside the central hub, beings from 12 different worlds had gathered for what everyone hoped would be the last peace talks of a war that had been going on for 30 years. Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of the station with steady steps. His gray hair was cut short, and his face showed the lines that came from too many battles and too many friends lost. The blue uniform of Earth's Federation fit him well, but he carried himself like a man who would rather be anywhere else. Behind him walked Dr. Lisa Campbell, a woman in her 40s whose sharp eyes missed nothing. She had spent most of her life studying alien cultures and knew more about how they thought than almost anyone alive. The third member of their group was General Paul Richards, a tall man with dark skin and the kind of calm presence that made people listen when he spoke. The 3 humans made their way to the main conference hall, passing aliens of all shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, while others seemed like they belonged in nightmares. The Zephyrians were tall beings made of what looked like living crystal. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Kithara looked like giant insects with too many arms and eyes that never blinked. The Luminari were the strangest of all, beings of pure energy that took the shape of glowing humanoids when they needed to interact with solid matter. As they entered the hall, Jake felt the weight of alien eyes upon them. The room was huge, with a circular table in the center that could seat representatives from all the gathered species. The lighting was adjusted to work for eyes that had evolved under different suns, creating an odd mix of colors that made everything look slightly unreal. High Curator Vel Thane of the Zephyrians stood at the head of the table. When he spoke, his voice created harmonics that resonated through the air like music, but there was nothing pleasant about the sounds he made. "The gathering is complete," he announced. "Let us begin these final discussions about the future of this galaxy." Jake took his seat with Lisa and Paul on either side of him. Around the table, alien representatives settled into their own positions. Queen Voice Shixnell of the Kithara made clicking sounds that her translator turned into words, but Jake could hear the hostility in the original sounds. Avatar Prime of the Luminare said nothing, but the energy being's form flickered in patterns that Lisa had learned to read as impatience. The first speaker was Vel Thane, and his words made it clear that this was not going to be the kind of negotiation Jake had hoped for. "Humanity has spread across the stars like a plague," the crystal being said. "Your species breeds too fast, fights too hard, and refuses to accept the natural order that has kept peace in this galaxy for thousands of years. We are here to offer you a chance to survive, but only if you accept the limits that must be placed upon you." Lisa leaned forward slightly, her face showing no emotion, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. She had warned him that the aliens might try this approach. Paul remained perfectly still, but his dark eyes were taking in every detail of the room and the beings around them. The terms that Vel Thane presented were worse than Jake had expected. Humanity would be confined to the star systems they currently held, with no further expansion allowed. They would have to give up their most advanced military technology and submit to alien inspectors, who would make sure they never developed anything that could threaten the established powers. Human colonies in disputed territories would be handed over to alien control, and Earth itself would have to accept alien advisors in key government positions. "These are the conditions for peace," Vel Thane concluded. "Accept them, and your species will be allowed to continue existing under our guidance. Refuse them, and the combined fleets of 12 civilizations will reduce your worlds to ash." Jake kept his face neutral, but inside he felt a cold anger building. These aliens thought they were offering mercy, but what they were really demanding was the complete surrender of everything that made humanity free. He looked around the table and saw the same expectation in every alien face. They believed humans would have no choice but to accept. Queen Voice Shiksnell spoke next, her translated words carrying the certainty of the hive mind behind them. Your individual consciousness makes you weak and divided. You cannot possibly stand against species that think as one. Submit now, and some of you may be allowed to serve useful purposes in the new order. Avatar Prime's energy form pulsed brighter as it added its own thoughts. Mathematical analysis indicates zero probability of human victory in extended conflict. Logical choice is immediate acceptance of offered terms. Other alien representatives added their own voices to the chorus, each one making it clear that they saw this meeting as nothing more than a formality before humanity's inevitable surrender. They spoke of human colonies as if they were already conquered territory, discussing which species would take control of which systems. Lisa passed a small note to Jake under the table. On it she had written just 3 words. They expect capitulation. Jake nodded slightly and passed the note to Paul, who read it and then calmly tore it into small pieces. As the hours passed, the alien demands became even more harsh. They wanted humans to give up not just their military, but their fastest ships, their best scientists, and even their most productive worlds. They spoke of humanity like a dangerous animal that needed to be caged for the safety of everyone else. Jake finally spoke for the first time that day. We need time to consider your proposal, he said simply. Velthane's crystal form rang with what might have been laughter. Of course you do. Take 12 hours to discuss among yourselves how you will accept the inevitable. When we meet again tomorrow, we expect your full agreement to all terms. As the session ended and the aliens began to leave, Jake caught fragments of their conversations. They were already planning how to divide up human territory, talking about which worlds had the best resources and which human populations would make the best workers. To them, the war was already over. That night, in the secure quarters assigned to the human delegation, Jake sat with Lisa and Paul and finally allowed his true feelings to show. They think we're already beaten, he said quietly. Lisa nodded. They've completely misunderstood us. They see our willingness to negotiate as weakness, when it's actually just good sense to explore all options before committing to a course of action. Paul spoke for the first time in hours. They're about to learn the difference between choosing to talk and having to surrender. Jake made his decision then, though he had been moving toward it all day. Tomorrow the aliens expected humanity to kneel, but they were going to get something very different instead. The second day of talks began with even more arrogance from the alien delegation. High Curator Velthane entered the conference hall like he owned the entire galaxy, his crystal body catching the light and throwing it around the room in sharp patterns. Behind him came the other alien representatives, all of them moving with the confidence of beings who believed they had already won. Jake Morrison sat in the same chair as the day before, but everything felt different now. Lisa Campbell had her hands folded on the table in front of her, looking calm and professional, but Jake could see the tight line of her mouth. Paul Richards looked as relaxed as ever, but his eyes were constantly moving, taking in details that others might miss. Velthane wasted no time with pleasantries. Have the humans reached the obvious conclusion about their situation? He asked, his harmonic voice filled with satisfaction. We are prepared to finalize the terms of your surrender and begin the process of bringing order to your chaotic species. Queen Voice Shiksnell made her clicking sounds before the translator converted them to words. The hive mind has already calculated the resources that will be available once human resistance ends. Your worlds will serve the greater good of the galaxy under proper guidance. Jake leaned back in his chair and looked at the alien faces around the table. They were not even pretending this was a negotiation anymore. They had moved straight to discussing the details of how they would carve up human space between themselves. The Zephyrians wanted the mining worlds with rare crystals. The Kithara were interested in agricultural planets that could feed their growing population. The Luminari wanted access to human research facilities and the scientists who worked in them. We have prepared the final documentation, Velthane continued, and a holographic display appeared above the table, showing star maps with human territory divided into colored sections. Each species will take responsibility for managing the seeing human populations in their assigned regions. The transition will begin immediately upon your acceptance of these terms. Lisa spoke quietly to Jake, without looking at him. They have already drawn up the occupation plans. This was decided before we even arrived. Avatar Prime pulsed brighter as it added its thoughts to the discussion. Efficient resource allocation requires immediate implementation. Human delay. Tactics serve no logical purpose. Jake asked for a private consultation with his team, and the aliens agreed with obvious amusement. They believed the humans needed time to accept their fate, but they were happy to let them have a few hours to come to terms with reality. In their secured quarters. The three humans finally spoke freely. The room was protected by the best jamming. Technology Earth had developed, making it impossible for alien listening devices to pick up their conversation. They think this is already over, Lisa said, pulling up her own analysis on a portable screen. I have been monitoring their body language and communication patterns. They are not negotiating with us. They are explaining to us how our surrender will work. Paul nodded grimly. Their fleet positions confirm it. While we have been sitting here talking, they have been moving their ships into attack formations around every major human system. They plan to begin the invasion the moment we refuse their terms, or maybe even if we accept them. Jake stood up and walked to the small window that looked out into space. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were going about their daily lives, not knowing that their freedom was being discussed like a business transaction by beings who saw them as nothing more than useful animals. I intercepted some of their private communications last night, Lisa continued. They have been planning this for months. The peace talks were never real. They are just a way to make their conquest look legitimate to other galactic powers who might object to unprovoked aggression. Paul pulled up his own data files. It gets worse. They have already identified human leaders they want to eliminate, and others they think they can use as puppet governors. They have lists of our scientists, our military officers, our politicians, all sorted by how useful they might be to the new order. Jake turned back to his companions. Show me the communications traffic. Lisa activated a holographic display that showed intercepted alien messages from the past 24 hours. The content made Jake's jaw tighten with anger. The aliens were not just planning to conquer humanity, they were planning to break them completely. Human children would be taken from their parents and raised in alien facilities to be loyal servants. Human culture would be eliminated and replaced with whatever the occupying species preferred. Even human history would be rewritten to make the conquest seem like a rescue operation. They keep calling us primitives and barbarians, Paul observed. But look at what they are planning to do. They want to commit genocide, but they want to feel good about it. Jake made his decision then, though he had been moving toward it since the moment he first heard Velthane speak. Send the message, he told Paul. Protocol 7. Execute immediately. Paul nodded and began entering codes into his secure communicator. The message that went out was brief, but every human military commander and government leader would understand what it meant. The talking was over. It was time for humanity to show these aliens what they really were. Are you sure about this? Lisa asked. Once we walk away from these talks, there will be no going back. They will see it as an act of war. Jake looked at her steadily. They were always going to see everything we did as an act of war. The only question was whether we were going to fight as free beings or as slaves trying to earn better treatment from their masters. Over the next few hours, responses began coming back to Paul's communicator. Military units across human space were acknowledging the order and beginning to implement plans that had been prepared for years but never used. Hidden weapon systems were coming online. Civilian populations were being quietly moved to safer locations. Intelligence networks that had been dormant for decades were suddenly buzzing with activity. The Zephyrians think they understand human psychology because they have studied our military tactics, Lisa said as she monitored alien communications. They have no idea that our greatest strength was never our weapons or our strategies. It was our refusal to accept that anyone else has the right to decide our fate for us. When the talks resumed that evening, the alien delegates were practically glowing with anticipation. They had spent the day making final preparations for what they saw as humanity's inevitable surrender. Vel Thane had even prepared a speech about the wisdom of accepting the natural order of the galaxy. But as Jake Morrison looked around the table at the assembled alien representatives, he felt no fear and no doubt. These beings thought they were superior because they were older and more technologically advanced, but they had made a fundamental error in their calculations. They had mistaken humanity's willingness to talk for weakness when it was actually just good sense to understand your enemy before you destroyed them. The time for talking was over. While the alien delegates celebrated in their luxury quarters aboard Concordia Station, the three humans worked through the night in their modest rooms. Jake Morrison sat at a small desk, typing commands into his secure terminal with steady fingers. Each message he sent would change the course of history, but his face showed no emotion as he worked. Lisa Campbell had spread her research files across every available surface in the room. Years of studying alien cultures had prepared her for this moment, and now she was activating contacts that most people did not even know existed. Human agents who had spent decades living among alien populations were receiving coded messages that told them their long wait was over. Paul Richards coordinated the most delicate part of the operation from his position near the window. His fingers moved across multiple communication devices as he sent orders to human military units scattered across the galaxy. To anyone watching the message traffic, it would look like routine military communications, but every ship captain and base commander would understand the real meaning. The message Jake had sent earlier was simple but complete. Protocol 7 had been developed years ago as a contingency plan for exactly this situation. Every human leader had hoped they would never need to use it, but they had all agreed that slavery was worse than death. If the aliens wanted a war, humanity would give them one they would never forget. Dr. Campbell activated her network of intelligence operatives with a series of seemingly innocent messages. On Zephyrian worlds, human traders who had spent years building relationships with crystal beings began downloading classified military data. In Cathara space, human researchers working in alien laboratories started copying technological specifications and troop movement plans. Among the Luminari, human diplomats who had earned the trust of energy beings gained access to strategic databases that revealed fleet positions and supply routes. The most important part of the operation involved assets that the aliens did not even know existed. For 30 years, human engineers had been building what appeared to be mining stations and research facilities throughout their territory. The aliens had scanned these installations many times and found nothing threatening about them. They looked like exactly what they claimed to be, civilian operations designed to support human colonies. But inside each facility, hidden behind layers of deception and misdirection, were weapon systems that used technology captured from alien ships and improved with human innovation. Particle beam arrays that could punch through the heaviest alien armor. Missile systems that could track ships through hyperspace. defense shields that could absorb energy attacks and redirect them back at their source. Paul received confirmation messages from military commanders across human space as the hidden weapons came online. The aliens had been watching human military bases for signs of preparation, but they had been looking in the wrong places. The real strength of humanity's defense network was hidden among installations that looked completely peaceful. General Karen White reported from the Centauri system that her defensive platforms were fully operational. Admiral Steve Carter confirmed that his mobile strike force was in position near the Vega colonies. Commander Linda Brooks sent word from the Outer Rim that her reconnaissance units had successfully infiltrated alien supply lines. As the hours passed, more reports came in from across the galaxy. Human civilians were being quietly moved away from border worlds and potential battle zones. Medical facilities were being prepared for casualties. Food and ammunition supplies were being distributed to defensive positions. Everything was being done with the kind of efficiency that only came from years of careful planning. Lisa monitored alien communications throughout the night and found that their enemies were completely unaware of what was happening. The Zephyrians were discussing how they would reorganize human mining operations to increase crystal production. The Kithara were planning which human agricultural worlds would be converted to breeding farms for their expanding population. The Luminari were calculating how many human scientists they would need to maintain their research programs. "They still think we are going to surrender," Lisa reported to Jake as dawn approached on the station's artificial time cycle. "Their fleet movements suggest they are preparing for an occupation, not a battle. They expect to move into human space and find our forces standing down on orders from Earth." Jake nodded as he finished sending his final set of orders. "Let them think that for as long as possible. The longer they believe we are beaten, the more surprised they will be when they discover the truth." Paul received a priority message from Earth and read it quickly before reporting to the others. "Home Fleet confirms that all defensive systems are active and ready. President Adams sends his personal message that humanity stands behind whatever decision we make here." The three humans took a few hours to rest before the final session of the peace talks. They knew that everything would change once they entered that conference room again. The aliens expected to receive humanity's surrender, but they were going to get something very different instead. When the time came, Jake Morrison put on his dress uniform and checked his appearance in the mirror. He looked like what he was, a military officer who had spent his life defending his people. But today he would be defending something more than just human lives. He would be defending the right of his species to remain free. Lisa Campbell gathered her research files and sealed them in her briefcase. She had learned everything she needed to know about alien psychology, and now it was time to put that knowledge to use. The beings waiting in the conference room thought they understood humanity, but they were about to discover how wrong they were. Paul Richards secured his communication equipment and prepared to leave their quarters for the last time. Once they walked out that door, there would be no turning back. The course would be set, and humanity would either triumph as a free people or die as one. The three humans made their way through the corridors of Concordia Station one final time. Other beings they passed looked at them with mixtures of pity and contempt, assuming they were about to witness the formal surrender of the human race. None of them suspected that they were actually about to see something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. As they approached the conference hall, Jake felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He had made his choice, and he knew it was the right one. The aliens in that room were about to learn that there were some things worth fighting for, no matter what the odds, and freedom was the most important thing of all. The conference hall buzzed with alien voices as Jake Morrison entered with Lisa Campbell and Paul Richards walking beside him. The atmosphere was different from the previous days. Where before there had been tension and negotiation, now there was only expectation. The alien delegates had arranged themselves around the circular table like judges waiting to hear a confession. High Curator Velthon stood at his position, his crystal body reflecting the chamber lights in patterns that seemed almost celebratory. Queen Voice Shixnell clicked her mandibles in what Jake had learned was a sign of satisfaction among the Cathara. Avatar Prime pulsed with steady light, its energy form more stable than usual, suggesting confidence in the outcome. The time for discussion has ended, Velthine announced as the humans took their seats. We gather now to receive humanity's acceptance of the terms that will bring peace to this galaxy. The generous mercy we offer is more than your species deserves, but wisdom sometimes requires restraint. Jake sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table before him. Lisa appeared to be reviewing her notes, but her eyes were actually watching the alien body language around the room. Paul looked as relaxed as ever, but his position allowed him to see all the exits and potential threats. Queen Voice Shixnell spoke next, her translated words carrying the absolute certainty of the hive mind behind them. The collective has already prepared facilities for human relocation and re-education. Your children will learn to serve the greater good of the galaxy, instead of the primitive individualism that has made your species so dangerous. Other alien representatives added their voices to the chorus. The Drakmari spoke of mining quotas that human workers would be expected to meet. The Veltar discussed agricultural production targets for human farming worlds. The Nexari outlined research programs that would utilize human scientific knowledge under proper alien supervision. As Jake listened to them speak, he realized that these beings truly believed they were being generous. In their minds, they were offering humanity a chance to survive instead of simply eliminating them as a threat. They could not understand that there were things worse than death, and slavery was one of them. Avatar Prime addressed the humans directly, its energy form brightening as it spoke. Mathematical analysis confirms optimal resource utilization under proposed management structure. Human acceptance will result in maximum preservation of biological units while eliminating chaos factor from galactic stability equations. Jake stood slowly, his movement causing a ripple of attention around the room. Every alien eye focused on him as he prepared to deliver what they assumed would be humanity's surrender. The silence stretched as he looked at each delegate in turn, his expression giving away nothing of his thoughts. Admiral Morrison, Velthane prompted, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of impatience. The galaxy awaits your response to our generous offer. Jake opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. He looked down at the table for a moment, then back up at the assembled aliens. His silence was making some of them uncomfortable, but he seemed to be struggling with the words. Lisa Campbell closed her briefcase with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Paul Richards shifted slightly in his chair, the movement so subtle that only someone watching closely would notice it. The three humans seemed to be communicating without words, sharing some decision that the aliens could not understand. We are waiting for your acceptance. Queen Voice Shixnell clicked impatiently. The terms are final and non-negotiable. Your species will submit or be destroyed. There are no other options. Jake Morrison looked at her directly, his gray eyes steady and calm. For a moment, it seemed like he might finally speak the words the aliens were waiting to hear. The tension in the room built as every being leaned forward slightly, anticipating the moment when humanity would formally surrender its freedom. Instead, Jake pushed back his chair and stood up fully. His movement was deliberate and unhurried, like a man who had made a decision and felt no doubt about it. Lisa Campbell rose beside him, her face showing no emotion, but her posture radiating determination. Paul Richards stood as well, his dark eyes scanning the room one final time, as if memorizing the faces of their enemies. The aliens watched in confusion as the three Humans began walking toward the exit. No words were spoken. No explanations were offered. No negotiations were attempted. The human delegation simply turned their backs on the assembled representatives of 12 galactic civilizations and walked away. "Where are you going?" Vel Fane demanded, his crystal form ringing with disbelief. "You cannot leave without giving us your answer." Jake Morrison did not turn around. He did not acknowledge the question. He simply continued walking toward the door, with Lisa and Paul beside him. Their footsteps echoed in the suddenly silent chamber, as every alien stared in shock at this unprecedented behavior. Queen Voice Shixnell made angry clicking sounds that her translators struggled to convert into words. "Return to your seats immediately. The hive mind demands your submission. You have no choice but to accept our terms." The humans reached the door and passed through it without looking back. The aliens could hear their footsteps in the corridor outside, growing fainter as they moved away from the conference hall. The sound of their departure was the only response the galaxy's demand for surrender would receive. Avatar Prime pulsed rapidly, its energy form flickering with what might have been confusion. Behavior pattern does not match predicted parameters. Human action serves no logical purpose within established negotiation framework. Vel Fane recovered from his shock first and activated his communication system. "Human delegation, return immediately for completion of surrender ceremony. Your departure is unacceptable and will not be tolerated." The only answer was silence. The human ships were already undocking from Concordia Station, their engines powering up for the jump to hyperspace. Within minutes they were gone, leaving the alien delegates staring at each other in bewilderment. "What just happened?" asked the Drakmari representative, his scaled face showing confusion. "They walked away," Queen Voice Shixnell replied, stating the obvious, because no one could quite believe what they had witnessed. They simply walked away without saying a word. The aliens had expected many possible responses from humanity: surrender, desperate negotiation, angry defiance, or even violent resistance. But the one thing they had never considered was that the humans might simply refuse to acknowledge their authority at all. By walking away without a word, humanity had delivered the most devastating insult possible. They had treated the combined might of 12 galactic civilizations as if it was not worth their time to discuss. 6 months after the humans walked away from Concordia Station, the galaxy had become a very different place. High Curator Vel Fane stood in his command center aboard the Zephyrian flagship Crystal Dawn, staring at reports that made no sense. According to everything his people knew about warfare, the primitive humans who were supposed to have surrendered or been quickly defeated were somehow winning. The first shock had come within hours of the failed peace talks. Zephyrian fleets, moving to occupy human worlds, found themselves facing defensive installations that had not existed in their intelligence reports. Mining stations and research facilities suddenly revealed themselves to be heavily armed fortresses with weapons that could penetrate even the strongest. Crystal Armor. Queen Voice Shixnell had fared even worse. The Kithara Collective's rigid command structure, which had been their greatest strength for millennia, became a critical weakness when human cyber warfare specialists learned to disrupt their neural networks. Entire Kithara battle groups found themselves operating without coordination, their ships scattered and vulnerable to human strike forces that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Avatar Prime reported to the Luminary collective consciousness that human behavior continued to defy all mathematical models. The energy beings had calculated thousands of possible outcomes for the war, but none of their equations had accounted for an enemy that seemed to thrive on chaos and unpredictability. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UEC Seance, watching as another alien supply convoy fell victim to human raiders. His hair was whiter now, and his face showed the strain of months of constant warfare, but his eyes burned with the satisfaction of a man who had been proven right. The aliens had expected humanity to fight like civilized species, with massive fleets meeting in open battle, but humans had chosen a different path. Lisa Campbell worked from a mobile command center that never stayed in the same location for more than a few days. Her psychological profiles of alien leadership had proven devastatingly accurate as the enemy coalition began to fracture under pressure. The Zephyrians blamed the Cathara for intelligence failures, while the Luminari questioned whether their allies were truly committed to victory. Paul Richards coordinated strike teams across the galaxy from aboard a converted merchant vessel that looked like a harmless trader, but carried some of the most advanced military technology humanity had ever developed. His forces hit research stations, disrupted supply lines, and eliminated key infrastructure with surgical precision. The most effective part of the human strategy was something the aliens had never considered. Instead of trying to match their enemies' technological advantages, humanity had focused on exploiting their psychological weaknesses. The Zephyrians' pride in their ancient civilization made them predictable. The Kithara's hive mind mentality left them unable to adapt when their standard tactics failed. The Luminaries' reliance on mathematical certainty paralyzed them when faced with genuinely random human behavior. D.R. Campbell had also identified moderate factions within each alien species that were growing tired of the war. She reached out to these groups through carefully chosen intermediaries, offering them an alternative to the failed leadership that had brought them into conflict with humanity. Some Zephyrian crystal singers had begun to question whether their high curators truly understood the changing galaxy. Certain Kithara sub-hives were developing thoughts independent of the collective consciousness. Even among the Luminari, some energy beings were calculating that cooperation might be more logical than continued conflict. The war reached its turning point when human forces liberated the Ultrani system. The Ultrani were a peaceful species that had been conquered by the Zephyrians decades earlier and forced to work in crystal mines. When human ships arrived, they came not as conquerors but as liberators, offering the Ultrani the same independence that humanity was fighting to preserve. Word of the liberation spread quickly through the galaxy. Other oppressed species began to see humanity not as a threat to galactic stability, but as champions of freedom for all beings. Rebellions broke out on worlds that had been under alien control for generations. The coalition that had seemed so united in its opposition to humanity began to crumble as its member species faced internal uprisings. General Richards coordinated with these rebel movements, providing them with weapons and tactical support. The aliens who had planned to divide human space among themselves now found their own territories, slipping away as former subjects demanded their freedom. The final blow came when Admiral Morrison received an unexpected communication. High Curator Vel Thane, the same being who had demanded humanity's surrender at Concordia Station, was requesting a meeting to discuss new terms for peace. The message was transmitted from near Earth itself, showing how completely the strategic situation had reversed. Jake agreed to meet, but this time the location would be a simple conference room aboard a human space station in Earth orbit. No grand ceremonies, no elaborate protocols, just a practical discussion between beings who now understood each other's true capabilities. When Vel Thane arrived with a small delegation of other alien representatives, they looked very different from the arrogant conquerors who had gathered at Concordia. The crystal being's form seemed dimmer, his harmonic voice carrying undertones of uncertainty. Queen Voice Shixnell clicked nervously, her translator struggling with concepts that the hive mind was still trying to process. Avatar Prime flickered unsteadily, its energy patterns showing the strain of calculations that no longer made sense. Admiral Morrison, Vel Thane began, his voice lacking its former authority. We have come to discuss revised terms for ending this conflict. Jake leaned back in his chair and looked at the aliens who had once demanded his species surrender. The terms are simple, he said. Humanity will be recognized as an equal member of galactic civilization with all the rights that implies. We will expand, explore, and defend ourselves as we see fit. In return, we offer genuine partnership and the benefits of human innovation. Lisa, Campbell added her voice to the discussion. What you failed to understand is that humanity's greatest strength was never our technology or our military tactics. It was our refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. You mistook our willingness to negotiate for weakness, but negotiation is a choice we make, not a necessity we submit to. The signing of the new Concordia Accords took place 3 days later. The treaty established humanity as a major galactic power and created a new framework for interspecies relations based on mutual respect rather than domination. Representatives from dozens of newly liberated worlds attended the ceremony, celebrating not just the end of the war, but the beginning of a new era. Paul Richards observed the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. Sometimes, he remarked to Jake, the most powerful statement you can make is to walk away from the table and let your actions speak louder than words ever could. The galaxy would never be the same, and humanity had earned its place among the stars through the simple act of refusing to kneel.